5 cyclists dead in 5 days, and a 10-year-old cyclist fighting for her life. What on earth is happening between cyclists and motorists on our roads? Last night a cyclist was killed on Pupuke Drive. Just over a year ago we were discussing another terrible cycling accident on the same road in Auckland. A university student drove her car into a group of cyclists. 3 of them were injured. One still suffers from the brain injuries he received. The group he was riding with that day called themselves the Pickled Pedallers. We went back to the Pedallers to spend a morning session with them and to see life on the roads from a cyclist's eye view. Sunrise over Takapuna on Auckland's North Shore. It's a beautiful spring morning, and throughout the city, indeed throughout the country, people who love to cycle but who live in cities are up early to beat the morning traffic and to have the roads to themselves as much as is possible in a city of 1.4 million people.
I've been knocked off on bike 4 times.
We thought we'd spend a couple of hours with these guys, passionate, experienced cyclists, to see what happens when they're out and about. Things are changing, they tell us.
Well, I've been cycling about 30 years, and I think there's far more aggression on the road, probably in the last 2 or 3 years, than I've ever encountered.
So we strapped a small camera onto their bikes to get a good close look at life in the early morning traffic from bike level. And what we learned is that bikes and cars don't coexist quite as well as they ought to, not when the stakes are so high.
Some motorists, just some, have a chip on their shoulder, and there's no doubt that some cyclists get up motorists' noses too. People riding 2 and 3 abreast when they shouldn't be. They should be riding single lane, and that really annoys some motorists, and I think they take it out on someone else somewhere along the way.
While we were filming, other larger groups went by, sometimes riding more than 2 and 3 abreast. On narrow roads and busy city roads, this can create tension. But what we found on our morning outing was cycling as it ought to be, sunny, safe and fun. Those on the bikes told us it's not always this way.
I've changed sport, from an impact sport to what's supposed to be a low impact. I've seen more mayhem and injury on the roads than I ever did on a rugby field. I've seen guys close to dying.
There are definitely people out there that are quite angry about cycles on the road, and they show that aggression by going very close to you, pulling over quickly in front of you, tooting horns, and just every now and then you can get things thrown at you, especially out in the open road. But it doesn't happen a lot, but it happens enough for you to realise that there's a segment of the population that just don't like bikes on the road.
Many of these guys belong to the Pickled Pedallers, a famous Auckland cycling group who last year were on the city's Pupuke Drive when they were ploughed into by university student Jennifer Speakman.
12 months ago, a waterfront ride with the Pickles, a lack of concentration from a driver, wiped out 3 or 4 guys, and a very good friend was taken to hospital, unconscious, and lucky to be alive today. He hasn't worked since. This is over 12 months.
And last night on Pupuke Drive again, another accident. A 27-year-old British woman staying in New Zealand killed on an Auckland city road that is both loved and feared by cyclists. A perfect evening for a bike ride on one of the city's great routes, then tragedy. This is where Jane Mary Bishop was killed last night. You can see absolutely easily how it happened. On the road you can see the markings of where the cars were parked. Now Jane was coming from the city this way. The car that was parked here opened its doors. She swung out to avoid it and was hit from behind by a truck that had just come round this corner, probably at an utterly legal speed like these cars, but she had nowhere to go. Now remember, this is probably the busiest cycle route in New Zealand. This afternoon we mounted a camera on our car and followed cyclists along Pupuke Drive. Rex Gordon loves his cycling, but he concentrates hard, looks for risks constantly, particularly to his left and from behind, and he signals as he goes. He wants to make it home.
In the last 3-4 years cycling, probably had 100 near misses a year. That's not uncommon. And I'm only doing 150k to 200k a week when I'm training seriously.
100 near misses a year?
Yep. 2 or 3 times, 4 or 5 times in a 4-hour ride is not unusual. I had to jump in the ditch a couple of times. Yep.
5 cyclists dead in a week. What ought to be great, relaxing exercise can be fraught and dangerous. Narrow, crowded roads, bikes and cars sharing them, the room for error so very small, the stakes so very high.